The self-attention we practice in the midst of other activities will not be very deep or intense, so we should also set aside time to practice it more intensely. When we do so, our aim should be to turn our attention 180 degrees away from other things, towards self. If we once succeed in turning our attention 180 degrees towards self, we will experience perfect clarity of self-awareness, unsullied by even to the slightest awareness of any other thing. This is the state of true self-knowledge, which will completely destroy the illusion that we are this mind, so after this illusion of experiencing anything other than I can never return. While trying to turn your attention 180 degrees towards self, whenever you feel your attention is becoming slack, do not try to keep up the pressure. It is better to allow your attention to return to 0 degrees for a while, and then to make a fresh attempt. If you wish to punch something, it is best to draw your fist right back, because then your punch will have maximum impact. Likewise, if you start your attempt to turn your attention selfwards from 0 degrees, your effort will have maximum force. By incessantly repeating such fresh attempts, you will gradually be able to turn your attention further and further towards self. 40 degrees, 60 degrees, 75 degrees, and more. In between each fresh attempt, you can usefully spend the time you are resting at 0 degrees, that is, attending to second and third persons by doing manana, thinking about Bhagavan's teachings, or sarvana, reading his teachings. At all times between such attempts, you should also take care to be indifferent to whatever experiences may come, because you can then build a strong foundation of vairagya, freedom from desire to attend to anything other than I, and bhakti, love to attend only to I, from which you will sooner or later be able to make your final leap, turning the full 180 degrees towards self. Some ripe aspirants do not need even to make such incessant efforts to turn selfwards, because they always remain vigilantly aware of self, waiting for the moment when they can take their final leap, the complete 180-degree turn towards self. Their practice is like the swinging of a shot putter preparing to throw his shot. When I was first taught by Janaki Mata to practice dualistic forms of meditation, such as murti dhyana, meditation upon a form of God, I found that continuous practice of such meditation caused me to have visions and other such divine experiences. But I soon understood that that was not the way to experience self. Only svarupa dhyana, meditation upon self, which is another term Bhagavan used to describe the practice of atma vichara, can enable one to experience self as it really is. It is difficult for us to mix with sadhakas who have other thought currents. Hearing their ideas and their views about other gurus, we naturally feel lonely, since we love Bhagavan and like to think only of him and his teachings. But we should be careful not to preach. We should not express Bhagavan's views to anyone unless we are asked. Other gurus like Buddha and Shankara went to the world to teach their ideas, but Bhagavan has shown us that that is not necessary. The world is like your shadow, so if you go out towards it to reach it, it will recede from your grasp. But if you withdraw within yourself, it will follow you and subside there. If you quietly keep the fire of devotion to I, which Bhagavan has kindled within you, burning within your own heart by repeated shravana, manana, and nidhyasana, studying, reflecting upon, and practicing his teachings, that is the best way to teach the world to follow him. Act without desire for fruit, says the Bhagavad Gita. Self-attention is not actually an action or karma, because it is a state of just being, not doing anything. But so long as we consider it to be something that we must do, it is the only doing that will give no fruit or karma phala. Therefore self-attention is the only true karma yoga. That is why Bhagavan says in verse 10 of Upadesa Undiyar and verse 14 of Uladu Narpadu, Anubandham, being having subsided in the place from which we rose. That is karma and bhakti. That is yoga and jnana. Investigating to whom are these karma, vibhakti, viyoga, and ajnana alone is karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. When one investigates without I, those defects do not ever exist. Remaining permanently as self is the reality. If we rise as I, we will feel that we are entangled in action, karma, and in a state of non-devotion, vibhakti, or lack of true love for God, separation, viyoga, from God, and ignorance, ajnana, of our real nature. Therefore, subsiding back in self, the source from which we rose, by investigating who am I who experiences such karma, vibhakti, viyoga, and ajnana, is the correct practice of the 4 yogas or means of reunion. Nishkamya karma, desireless action, bhakti, devotion, raja yoga, and jnana, self-knowledge. When we investigate thus, the false I will subside and disappear, and in its absence there will be no one to experience any karma, vibhakti, viyoga, or ajnana. What will then remain is the only reality, which is the state in which we abide permanently as self, without ever rising to be or to experience anything else. Kunju Swami had this to say. In his later years, after all the court cases that he put against the ashram, Perumal Swami came to Bhagavan and complained, "When I was a young man, I came to you for moksha, liberation, but you allowed me to be led astray by my weak buddhi, mind, or intellect. Now I shall surely go to hell." To which Bhagavan replied, "Do you think I am not there also?" On another occasion, Kunju Swami told me a similar story. After the ashram had won a case that Purunal Swami had put against it and Bhagavan in a local court, he came to Bhagavan and declared angrily, "Though you won this case, I will not leave you. I will take it to a higher court and continue fighting until I win. If you are God, as they claim, you can put me in hell, but even then I will not leave you." To which Bhagavan gently replied, "Even if you go to hell, I will not leave you." Whether or not Perumal Swami understood what Bhagavan meant, these words of his were a gracious assurance that he would never forsake him but would certainly save him. I heard this story from other sources also, so I believe it is reliable. Therefore, I am not sure whether these stories refer to 2 separate incidents or whether the version I recorded here was the same incident with some details confused. On another occasion, having read Bhagavan's biography, a new devotee angrily asked him, "Who is this fellow Perumal Swami?" But Bhagavan replied affectionately, "That is our Perumal," and continued to praise him, describing all the good service he had done. Not only did Bhagavan not feel any enmity towards anyone, but he also did not allow us to feel enmity towards anyone. During the waking state, whenever you do not feel love to attend to self, you cannot but attend to second and third persons, things that are other than oneself, the first person. So at such times it is best to resort to Shravana, studying Bhagavan's teachings, and Manana, reflecting on them. Making intermittent attempts to attend to self is the most effective way to proceed. It is useless to struggle constantly to attend to self, because that would be like standing deep in mud and trying to lift something out. The more you try to do so, the deeper you sink. The firm foothold is necessary, and it is provided by Shravana and Manana. The foothold is Vairagya, dispassion, which is freedom from desire to attend to any second or third person object, and Bhakti, devotion, which is love to attend only to the first person. Our whole life should go on in this way, with our mind kept occupied in Shravana, Manana, and Nidhyasana, contemplation on self. Shravana and Manana may take a long time, depending on the individual mind, but the correct nidhyasana takes just a split second. We may be able to turn 179 degrees away from everything else towards self, but even that is not perfect nidhyasana. It is just an attempt at perfect nidhyasana, and is like jumping 9.5 feet across a 10-foot well. To land safely on the other side, we must jump the full 10 feet. Likewise, to experience ourselves as we really are, we must turn the full 180 degrees. One must also know what type of shravana will be effective. To be most effective, shravana must be focused and directed unswervingly in just one direction. So reading this and that from numerous different gurus is not proper shravana. You must find a guru with whose thought current you can agree. Then discover what his real teachings are and then practice them alone. Even reading books like Day by Day and talks is not adequate shravana. There are many useful ideas in these books, but they are not presented there in a clear, coherent, or sequential manner. So they are not sufficient to give you a firm foothold on Bhagavan's teachings and to stop you from sinking into a mire of confused and uncertain ideas. Moreover, many ideas in such books are answers that Bhagavan gave to questions that various types of people ask him from a wide variety of perspectives. So such answers often do not represent his real teachings, since he always tailored his answers to suit the needs, concerns, and aspirations of each questioner and their ability or willingness to understand whatever he might say to them. Therefore, to understand such answers in a proper perspective, we need to view them in the clear light of his actual teachings. So anyone who does not already have a clear and thorough understanding of his essential teachings will be liable to misunderstand or be confused by some of the answers recorded in such books. Therefore, if we wish to do shravana correctly and effectively, we must carefully and repeatedly study and reflect upon Bhagavan's own original writings, such as Nanyar, Who Am I, Upadesa Undiyar, Uladunar Pradu, Anma Vidai, and Ekatmat Panchakam. Except these few short texts, no other books are really necessary to enable a sincere aspirant to understand Bhagavan's essential teachings correctly. Even the path of Sri Ramana should not be necessary, and it became necessary only because people made clear to me the extent to which they had failed to understand his teachings correctly, partly because they had not studied his original writings carefully enough, but also due to confusion caused either by other books they had read or by their reliance on inadequate translations and interpretations of his teachings. For example, some writers imagine spurana to be some sort of pulsation, throbbing, or vibration in the heart, so they have written that this is what we should hold on to. However, anything that pulsates, throbs, or vibrates is obviously something other than the I who experiences it, so it is only a second person. The experience of I, the first person, is such that it cannot be described in any way. When Bhagavan used the term spurana, he meant only aham spurana, the clear shining of I, which is not a new knowledge of anything other than I, but only a new knowledge of I, our own self. That is, it is a fresh clarity of our self-awareness. It is awareness of the same I that we always experience, but it is experienced with a fresh degree of clarity. Because it is such a clarity, when it is experienced, no doubts will rise about it, just as when you are fully satisfied after eating a sumptuous meal, no doubt can rise in your mind about whether or not you are still hungry. Once experienced, the clarity called spurana can never be forgotten, and if we hold on to it firmly, it will automatically lead us to our sahaja sthiti, natural state. Though we need to make intermittent attempts to attend to self, Between such attempts, we must also be vigilant at all times to avoid attending to any unnecessary thoughts. Most of the thoughts that we think each day are not actually necessary, and they serve only to distract our attention away from self, so we must gradually cultivate the habit of taking interest only in self-attention, instead of in anything else that we may think about. If every moment that we spend attending to unnecessary thoughts were spent attending to self, most of our time each day would be spent in self-attention. Therefore, indifference towards thoughts of anything other than self is a powerful aid in our practice of self-attention. Bhagavan was so unconcerned about everything that he did not experience even the actions of his mind, speech, or body as his own. So he never felt, I am thinking, I am talking, or I am doing. Because of his complete lack of doership, on behalf of Perumal Swami, he wrote a verse in praise of himself as Lord Subramanya, but signed it Perumal 8. And on behalf of Jagadishwara Shastri, he wrote the verse Hidraya Kuhara Maidhaye in the center of the heart cave, which he likewise called Jadadisa. This verse is referred to towards the end of section 291 of Talks, in which it is recorded that Bhagavan said that the handwriting of the verse was his own, whereas the ideas in it were Perumal Swami's. And when asked whether he agreed with the statement made in it, he replied, in the same way as an idol is praised as Subramanya. Bhagavan's Tamil translation of this verse is included in Uladunarpadu Anubandham as verse 8. Near the end of chapter 7 of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it is recorded that on Monday, 1st January 1893, Sri Ramakrishna said, "One ultimately discovers God by trying to know this I." In a quiet mind, many truths about past and future events may be known. But this is not a siddhi, an attainment of a desired supernatural power, because it happens only in the absence of any volition or desire for such an experience. It is likewise only in a calm and quiet mind that Bhagavan's silent teachings can be received. They are not received in words, but only as an inner clarity of understanding. And they give us such a strong conviction that no one can ever shake our trust in what we discovered through them. However much we may struggle to do so, we cannot find words to express the clarity we discover through the power of his silence. By allowing falsehood and injustice to thrive in this world, and truth and justice to be suppressed, Bhagavan is testing us. If we allow an I to rise and object, he will laugh at us from within. So you still believe this world to be real. Therefore our duty is to keep quiet. If we are actually attacked, we must respond as if we were brushing away a wasp. But having taken whatever action is necessary, we should keep quiet, both inwardly and outwardly. We should not brood over the matter or bear a grudge towards anyone who does wrong to us. Like Bhagavan, Sri Ramakrishna also taught that we can know God by only trying to know who is this I who wants to know God. What is important in surrender is that we should desire only what Bhagavan desires for us. If our desires are contrary to what he wants for us, how can he give us moksha, liberation? What he wants is to give us moksha, but moksha entails freedom from desire. So unless we are willing to give up all our desires, he will not give us moksha, because he will not force us to accept what we do not want. If we only want whatever he gives us, then from this very moment we can live free from all cares and worries, because nothing can ever happen that is not his will, so we will happily accept whatever may be. Thus there is no difference between self-abidance and complete self-surrender. If we abide as self, we will experience nothing other than self, and hence there will be no identification with the body. So how can we then desire or pray for the removal of pain or for anything else. Likewise, if we surrender to Him, we will have no desires or concerns, so how can we then pray for anything? If our will and desires are perfectly attuned with His will, what can our vasanas, inclinations, or propensities do to obstruct His work? A genuine willingness to surrender to His will effectively neutralize the power of all our other vasanas. Therefore, without the least hesitation, we should sign over to Him a blank check. That is, we should completely surrender to Him our original freedom to will and act, because there is no one who loves us or cares for us more than He does. He loves us as His own self, so His love for us is even greater than our love for ourselves, because He loves us as we really are, whereas we love ourselves as a person, which is not what we really are. The stronger our faith in His love and power is, the quieter our mind will be, and hence the more peaceful and pleasant our life will be. To save us from the bondage created by our own ego, He is working equally hard and effectively in each and every one of us. I am so confident about this that I do not worry myself about anyone. As our essential self, He is working in all of us, and He knows what is the best way to save each of us. Bhagavan has a peculiar way of leading His devotees. He will never let us know how advanced we are in our practice of self-abidance. He is such a masterful guru that He will never allow any I to rise in pride within us by knowing I am making progress on this path. Though we may be very advanced, we will feel ourselves to be the most worthless of all, as Bhagavan expresses in verse 39 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamanali. O Arunachala, by what power can I, who am worse than a dog, seek and reach you? Though we may often succeed in turning 130 degrees or 140 degrees away from all other things towards self, we will still feel that our attempts are wholly inadequate. We are like small children whose growth seems imperceptible to themselves or even to their parents, who see them daily. But we are growing nonetheless. Though we do not know what is best for us, Bhagavan does, and He is therefore maturing us in whatever way is best suited in our present stage of development. When we first come to the path of Sri Ramana, a certain amount of reasoning is necessary to give us firm faith in the truth of what He has taught us. But once our faith is firmly established, we can entrust ourselves blindly to Him. Once we know that we are on a broad trunk road with stronger barriers on either side preventing us from going astray, we can close our eyes and run blindly ahead. This is why I emphasize in the second part of the path of Sri Ramana that one cannot become a yogi bhrashta, a person fallen from the path of yoga, after entering the third or fourth standards in the school of bhakti, the stages at which one has acquired one-pointed devotion to God or Guru respectively. We are now prey in the jaws of a powerful tiger, so we will never be forsaken. Though we cannot by any means gauge our progress in the practice of self-abidance, by considering our own desires in an unbiased manner, we can gauge in what standard we are in the school of bhakti. Relatively few people are actually in the third or fourth standards, because to qualify to be in them, one must be wholly devoted to either God or Guru for their own sake, and not for the sake of any personal benefit that one may gain from them. Even among the devotees of Bhagavan, many are at best in the third standard, because though their devotion to Him may be one-pointed, which is the basic requirement for the third standard, they will expect Him to grant the fulfillment of their personal desires and pray to Him accordingly. Thus their love for Bhagavan is not pure, because it is mixed with their love for whatever they desire to gain from Him. Even though many of our vasanas may be hidden from our view, so long as our greatest desire is only for the annihilation of I. We are in the fourth standard. Then only have we been truly caught in the Guru's glance of grace. Having thus been caught by him, we need not worry about our hidden vasanas, because if hidden desires rise in our mind, his hidden grace will certainly come to protect us. Shravana, manana, and nidhyasana, study, reflection, and self-contemplation should all go on hand in hand. Only by practicing an art do you experience whatever difficulties it entails, and such experience enables you to understand more clearly and deeply the instructions you have been given. Therefore, each time you slip down from an attempt at nidhyasana, having failed to turn the full 180 degrees, you can return to your Shravana and Manana, and then you will find that you are able to grasp more clearly what Bhagavan has taught us. To emphasize the importance of Shravana and Manana in some ancient Advaitic text, it is said that even after the disciple has finally realized the truth, when he asks the Guru how he should spend the rest of his life, the Guru replies that he should continue in the same way as before, studying and reflecting upon the Guru's teachings. Because the Guru tells us not to think, some people wrongly conclude that Shravana and Manana are unnecessary. But this is like someone who tries to eat without using his hands because he has been told that we cannot eat except with our mouth. If you can keep quiet without thinking for 24 hours every day, that is good. But if you cannot always avoid thinking, it is best to think only of Bhagavan's teachings. We must understand that Bhagavan does not use the word uladu, which means what is or that which is, to denote some abstract concept of being or reality, as some philosophers do. He uses it simply to mean the one self-existing and self-evident reality, I am, which is always clearly known by everyone. When I remains as it is, without any adjuncts, it is the sole reality. But when it seems to rise as I am this body, it is as such unreal. That is, in the compound experience I am this body, I am alone is real, and the adjunct this body is unreal. Thus, as a compound of the real and the unreal, the I that feels I am this body is itself unreal. Since this I is unreal, why should we worry about its defects? Kama, action; vibhakti, lack of devotion; viyoga, separation; and ajnana, ignorance of self. If we investigate the I that seems to have these defects, we will find it to be unreal, and hence all its defects are likewise unreal. Therefore, in verse 14 of Uladu Narpadu Anubandham, Bhagavan says, investigating to whom are these, kama, vibhakti, viyoga, and ajnana, is itself kama, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. This is because when one investigates oneself, it will be clear that they, karma, vibhakti, viyoga, and ajnana, never exist without I, which is itself not real. Only being permanently as self is true. The first and only duty we have is to find the truth of this I. Bhagavan says in Nanyar, who am I that even if one is the worst sinner, if one would cling firmly to self-attention, svarupadhyana, one would certainly be reformed and saved. And the so-called other paths are only intended to purify the mind, because they cannot actually annihilate the ego. This is why Bhagavan says in verse 3 of Upadesa Undiyar, desireless action, nishkamya karma, done with love for God, purifies the mind, and therefore it shows the path to liberation. The path to liberation is only atma vichara, self-investigation or self-inquiry. But only a mind that is to some extent purified will be able to recognize that this is the only means to annihilate the ego. If we have recognized this, we do not need to follow any other path. because vichara will not only annihilate our ego eventually, but will also, in the meanwhile, purify our mind far more effectively and efficiently than any other path could. Therefore, paths other than Atma Vichara are only for those who do not understand that eradication of one's individuality is the goal, and that vichara is the only means by which we can achieve this goal. Such people are not true aspirants, because we only become aspirants when we have genuine love to make this I subside, for which Atma Vichara is the only means. The only benefit to be gained from other paths is sufficient mental purity to be able to grasp that Atma Vichara alone is the path by which we can reach our final destination, the state of liberation or true self-knowledge. Atma Vichara appears to be intellectual self-analysis only in the view of those who do not have sufficient mental purity to understand that we can know ourselves only by attending to ourself, and consequently to have true love for self-attention, which alone is the correct practice of vichara. Bhagavan repeatedly emphasized that Atma Vichara is the only path, the direct path for everyone, and also the easiest path. For example, in Nanyar, he says, only by means of the vichara investigation, who am I, will the mind subside or cease to be. To make the mind subside permanently, there are no adequate means other than vichara. If restrained by other means, the mind will remain as if subsided, but will emerge again. Therefore, pranayama, breath restraint, is just an aid to restrain the mind, but will not bring about manonasa, the annihilation of the mind. Just like pranayama, murti dhyana, meditation upon a form of God, mantra japa, repetition of sacred words such as a name of God, and ahara niyama, restriction of diet, are only aids that restrain the mind, but will not bring about its annihilation. In verse 885 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, he says, except by the path of investigating the vital awareness, I am, whatever effort is made by other means beginning with karma, one will not attain and enjoy self, the treasure shining in the heart. In verse 17 of Upadesa Undiyari says, when anyone scrutinizes the form of the mind without forgetting, it will become clear that there is no such thing as mind. For everyone, this is the direct path. Likewise, in Maharshi's Gospel, Book 2, Chapter 1, it is recorded that he said, whatever form your inquiry may take, you must finally come to the one I, the self. Self-inquiry is the one infallible means, the only direct one to realize the unconditioned, absolute being that you really are. Every kind of sadhana, spiritual practice, except that of Atma Vichara, presupposes the retention of the mind as the instrument for carrying on the sadhana, and without the mind it cannot be practiced. The ego may take different and subtler forms at the different stages of one's practice, but is itself never destroyed. The attempt to destroy the ego or the mind through sadhanas other than Atma Vichara is just like the thief assuming the guise of a policeman to catch the thief, that is himself. Atma Vichara alone can reveal the truth that neither the ego nor the mind really exists, and enables one to realize the pure, undifferentiated being of the self or the absolute. To be the self that you really are is the only means to realize the bliss that is ever yours. Since self is aware of nothing other than itself, I am, to be the self simply means to be aware of nothing but I alone, which is all that the practice of Atma Vichara entails. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadesa Undiyar, being self alone is knowing self, because self is not two. Because of our desire to be constantly experiencing something other than just I, it may seem difficult for us to experience only I. But Bhagavan assures us that this is actually very easy, much easier than any other means by which we may try to attain liberation. This is emphatically affirmed by him in verse 4 of Atma Vidya Kirtanam, to unite the bonds beginning with karma, and to rise above the ruin beginning with birth, rather than whatever other path. This path, Atma Vichara, is exceedingly easy. When one just is, having settled down without even the least action of mind, speech, or body, in one's heart, the light of self will shine forth. This is our eternal experience. Fear will not exist. The ocean of bliss alone will remain. Therefore, the science of self is extremely easy. Extremely easy. Every other sadhana entails doing some action, by mind, speech, or body, whereas Atma Vichara entails the mind subsiding without the least action by focusing the entire attention on its source, I am. Therefore, whereas any other sadhana is a practice of doing, Atma Vichara is the practice of just being as we really are, with perfect clarity of self-awareness. Hence, since being is easier than doing, Atma Vichara is the easiest of all paths. The purpose of Niskamya, Puja, Japa, and Dhyana, and of all sadhanas other than Atma Vichara, is only to purify the mind. Purification of mind is the sole benefit that can be gained from any such sadhanas, because none of them can ever by itself destroy the ego. The benefit of a purified mind is that it shows the path to liberation, as Bhagavan says in verse 3 of Upadesa Undiyar. That is, it enables the mind to discriminate, understand, and be firmly convinced that Atma Vichara alone is the path to liberation. Thus, when Sri Bhagavan says in Maharshi's Gospel, Book 2, Chapter 1, Atma Vichara alone can reveal the truth that neither the ego nor the mind really exist. He is not being partial, nor is he criticizing other sadhanas. He is merely asserting the truth that though other sadhanas can purify the mind, they cannot destroy it. Therefore, we should not confuse these paths for mental purification with the path to liberation, which is the one path taught by Bhagavan. The path he describes as, or Vazi, the one path, or the path of investigation, in verse 14 of Upadesa Undiyar. A true aspirant is one whose mind is sufficiently purified to understand that Atma Vichara alone can be the path to liberation, and therefore to love to practice it. Those who cannot understand this are at best just devotees of God. Bhagavan says that Atma Vichara is the direct path, not because he expects us to attack the mind directly, but because he expects us to turn directly towards self, I am, and by thus remaining in self, to ignore the mind. Thus Atma Vichara is, so to speak, avoiding and hiding from the mind instead of fighting it face to face. This is what is signified by Rama's method of killing Vali. Vali had a boon that he would receive half of the strength of anyone he faced in battle, so he was automatically more powerful than any opponent he had to face. Therefore, even Rama could not have killed him in face-to-face combat, so he had to hide behind a tree and shoot him from behind. Just as Vali gained half the strength of his opponent, if we try to fight the mind in direct combat, we will be giving it half of our strength, because our attention is what sustains or nourishes it. So the more we attend to it, that is, to its constant flow of thoughts, the more we are giving it strength. Therefore, the only way to destroy the mind is by attending only to I, and thereby ignoring all the other thoughts that constitute the mind. All our sadhanas, which are only actions performed by I, attempt to destroy the mind using it as the means or instrument. and hence Bhagavan likens them to someone confronting Vali or to a thief pretending to be a policeman, trying to catch the thief, or to a person trying to get rid of his own shadow. Therefore, Bhagavan advises us to ignore our shadow, the mind or ego, by turning our attention towards the Son, I Am. Bhagavan is performing a delicate operation which will radically change our long-accustomed outlook of mistaking a body to be I and the world to be real into the outlook that we alone are. If this change were to occur too fast, it would put too much pressure on our mind, upsetting our mental balance, and could either make us insane or even drive us to commit suicide. But Bhagavan is a very skilled surgeon, and so he knows the right speed at which to change our outlook. If we are going too fast, he sometimes has to disconnect the current for a while, which he does by making us feel disinterested in practicing self-attention. Therefore, we should not be disheartened by such experiences because they happen for our own good, and he can sometimes use such periods of apparent disinterest to push us right up to the boundary. Even Muruganar had a similar experience, feeling that he was a helpless case. We should always have faith in Bhagavan's assurance that we are like the prey in the jaws of a tiger, and that we can therefore never escape. If we strain too much, we might be obstructing Bhagavan in his work, so he sometimes even has to put an end to this life and make us take a new body. Death, suicide, and insanity seem to be big things to us, but to him they are minor events which he uses for our own benefit. The culture in India provides Hindus with many outlets when the pressure becomes too great. Even before I knew Bhagavan, I used to take days off work just to go to a lonely place to weep for God. To have satsanga with the right friends can also be a great help during rough periods. Shravana and manana, studying and reflecting on Bhagavan's teachings, are also very important at such times. They are like a protective fortress. When I say that intermittent attempts at self-attention are important, remember that the rest in between are as important as the attempts. Even if you attend to self for only a few seconds at each attempt, these attempts will have their effect unknown to you. Because of these attempts, occasionally at other times, say in the middle of some work, you will feel that you are being automatically reminded of your mere being, I am. But it is not the mind that is reminding you. It is similar to pricking a banana with the pin. You do not know how close the pin has come to the other side until you prick your hand. Doing Japa of I is helpful for those beginners who are not able to recognize that our awareness of I, that is, our awareness that I am, is something that is distinct from our awareness of our body or any other mental image. By practicing Japa of I, they can begin to experience for one moment now and then the awareness of I alone. Once they recognize this awareness of their mere existence, they can give up their Japa of I and instead practice simple self-attention. Suma Iru, which means just be or be still, is the correct way of describing self-attention, because self-attention is simply not attending to anything other than I, so it does not involve our attention moving anywhere away from its source, which is I. The Tamil adverb suma implies not doing anything because any doing or action always involves attending to something other than I. When we attend only to I, our attention remains in its source, as its source, I am. So self-attention is not an action but a state of just being. In one of his verses, Arunagiri Nettar sings in that when Lord Muruga told him Suma Iru, he ceased knowing anything, which means that he ceased attending to any second or third persons. When you correctly attend to self, then no doubts about it will arise, for your self-attention will then be as clear to you as is your present knowledge I am. On the other hand, We can also say that you will never know when you correctly attend to self, because from that moment, all knowing will cease, and being alone will remain. Bhagavan once said, not only is self Atman, that which does not know other things, it is that which does not know even itself as I am this. This idea was recorded by Sri Muruganar in verse 831 of Metava Vilakam. Self does not know not only its own nature, but also anything else. Such a knowledge alone is the real I. That is, self-knowledge is a knowledge quite unlike any other knowledge, because not only does self not know itself as an object of knowledge, but also its knowing itself is not an action or doing, but only being. Knowing anything else is an action, whereas self knows itself just by being itself. Therefore, in verse 26 of Upadesa Undiyar, Bhagavan says, being self alone is knowing self, because self is that which is devoid of two, a knowing subject and a known object. This is Tamaya Nishta. Abidance says that, the absolute reality called Brahman. At times, J. Krishnamurti seems to be describing the state of jnani, but what use is that to us unless we are told how to attain that state? He says we should observe suffering, conflict, and so on, in the actuality of the present moment. But that is not possible, because suffering and conflict, which are second and third persons, things other than I, the first person, are constantly changing in the flow of time from past to future. So in the actual present moment, there is no room for them. The actual present moment is infinitesimally brief, because it is the fine boundary between past and future, so there is absolutely no room in it for any movement or change, or even for the slightest rising the first person. Therefore, in the actual present moment, only the pure I am can be observed. In effect, he tells us to closely observe second and third persons, whereas Bhagavan tells us to have an attitude of indifference, udasina bhava, towards all second and third persons, to ignore them completely and to attend only to the first person. The first sentence of the first Mangalam, verse of Uladu Narpadu, can be interpreted in several slightly different ways, but they all mean essentially the same. It can mean if there were not something that really exists, which is called I, could there be any awareness of being, which is called M? Or it can mean, can awareness of being M be other than what is I? The words Ula Unarbu can mean either awareness of being or awareness to meditate. So the sentence can also mean, other than what is I, can there be any awareness to meditate on it? Bhagavan wrote this verse to refute the popular myth in India that it is possible to meditate upon reality. Initially, he wrote only the last two lines, which mean how to or who can meditate upon the thing that really exists. Know that being in the heart as it is alone is meditating upon it. However, when Kavyakanta saw that this verse had 2 lines and all the other verses had 4 lines, he suggested to Bhagavan that he should add 2 more lines to it. So Bhagavan then composed the first 2 lines. The resulting verse means, if there were not what is, could there be any awareness of being? Since the thing that is in the heart, devoid of thought, how to or who can meditate upon the thing that is, which is called heart? Know that being in the heart as it is, that is without any thought, alone is meditating upon it. The whole of Uladunarpadu is an expansion of this one basic idea. So Bhagavan starts his teachings by disparaging the idea of meditation, but nowadays people call the hall where he lived the meditation hall, and they expect that everyone who comes to Ramana Ashram should meditate. Self-attention is not meditation in the usual sense of the word, because it is not a mental activity. It may seem that trying to attend to self is an action, but in fact it is simply the effort to make the mind subside. When we attend to anything other than self, the mind rises and is active. But when we try to attend only to self, it subsides and ceases to be active. We always know I am, so we are always aware of and therefore attending to self. But our self-awareness is usually mixed with awareness of other things. So Bhagavan tells us to try to attend only to self, because such an attempt is the only means to make the mind subside. In fact, the mind that tries to attend only to self can never do so, because it is the nature of the mind to attend to second and third persons, which are non-self. But by trying to attend only to self, it will merge into its source, a real self, and then self alone will remain to know itself as it always does. In verse 1 of Uladunarpadu, the term Serpadam, which means the connecting, underlying, or pervading screen, can be taken to mean time and space, which underlie, support, and pervade the appearance of the world. The entire verse means, because we see the world accepting one original thing that has a power that becomes many, is certainly the one best option. The picture of names and forms, the world, the one who sees it, the supporting screen on which it appears, and the pervading light of consciousness that illumines it, all these are He, the one original thing, which is self. The verb urupadu usually means to form or reform, because the basic meaning of uru is form. But uru can also mean svarupa, our own form or real self. So in verse 33 of Sri Arunachala Akshamana Malai, the term urupadu vidai means atmavidya, the science and art of abiding as self. On the other hand, sepadi, viddai, means a deceptive art or science. So it can mean any worldly skill. Katru can mean either learning or one who is proficient. And ipadi can mean either this world or in this way. Thus this verse has two alternative meanings. Arunachala, teach me the art of abiding as self, giving up this worldly delusion of learning deceptive skills. Arunachala, giving up deluding me in this way, is one who is proficient in the art of deception. Teach me instead the art of self-abidance. Sadhu Om in reply to a letter. To quote your letter, I was not able to meditate in the way I had always become accustomed to. In the past, meditation has been an active process of intense effort whereby the ego sought out some elusive I. I now feel less and less able to concentrate within. By that I mean directing my mental gaze inwards towards some subtle center. In fact, I don't feel that I understand the term self-inquiry, which seems so crystal clear when I started on this path. I recall that once when somebody brought up the subject of Kriya Yoga, you said something to the effect that you were mystified how action could lead to a state of inaction. This seems to be the situation in which I now find myself. The old idea of meditation being an active process of seeking within seems to have fallen by the wayside. For who is to do the seeking? And for what? Self-attention is not to be done with any strain. Any other contemplation may need effort, but though this is called self-attention, it is nothing but a mental rest, relaxing the mind from attending to other things. Though it is said, turn your mind toward self, it is not an action done by the mind. When the mind does not do anything but keeps itself at rest, it is truly attending to self. Since this is an effortless state, how can there be any strain? The mind will have a reaction of insanity or jumping in a topsy-turvy way only if it is strained. That is, if it is compelled to concentrate on any other thing, whether in the name of self-intention or any other meditation. In our path of abiding in self, the mind returns to its home and takes rest from its adventures in yoga. Though this is called self-attention, it is nothing but a complete rest of the mind, and if practiced, it will not be the cause of what you have complained about in your letter, namely, erupting into wild outbursts of anger and violence. When after a long period of effort and struggles to do sadhana, one gives up doing sadhana, then and only then does real sadhana, self-attention, begin. Bhagavan once said, "They say it is difficult to stop thoughts, and also that by tapas nothing is impossible, but however much tapas I do, I cannot think a single thought. We think now that we must strain to withdraw our mind from second and third persons, but in fact we are straining ourselves to attend them. To rest in our natural state of self-attention is effortless, but it seems to require effort because we prefer to attend to other things. Therefore, we need to give up this liking to attend to anything else, because if we do so, we will no more be troubled by thoughts. Through sravana, studying Bhagavan's teachings, and manana, reflecting on them, we gain dispassion or indifference towards anything other than self. And by nidhyayasana, contemplation on self, we gain love for self-abidance. Though these seem to be two different practices, they both lead in the same direction. One of the many new ideas that Bhagavan has given us is that the real guru is a guru only in the view of the disciple. Though others may claim to be gurus, among Bhagavan and his real disciples, you will find no one saying, "I am the guru." Bhagavan always used to praise Guru as God himself, but when asked who is Guru, he pointed to Arunachala. He never accepted worship for his own form, but instead always encouraged people to direct their devotion, bhakti, towards Arunachala. When people praised him as Satguru, he asked, "But who brought me here?" It was Arunachala. Likewise, his disciples will always point only to him as the Guru and not to themselves. Not only will they say they are not the Guru, but they will not even have the slightest feeling that they are the Guru. That is the right sign of the true disciple. They will not allow any I to rise as an obstacle between any other aspirant and Bhagavan. When Alexander invaded North India, he was told about a great sage who lived in a cave on the nearby mountain. So he went to visit him early one morning and found an elderly man dressed in rags, crouching at the entrance of a cave, warming himself in the morning sunshine. When Alexander asked him what service he could do for him, the sage at first kept quiet. But when Alexander persisted, saying that he was the most powerful emperor in the world and could therefore give him anything he wanted, he finally just waved his hand, indicating to Alexander to step aside in order to stop obstructing the warmth of the sun. If we rise as an I, thinking, "I can guide others," we would be standing as an obstacle between those others and the shining of Bhagavan's grace, just as Alexander was standing as an obstacle between the old sage and the warm sunshine. Bhagavan often said self is the Guru, so the Guru has always been and will always be with us. Therefore we need not seek the Guru, because he is already doing his part, so we should concern ourselves only with seeking our own real self. As Bhagavan said in Maharshi's Gospel, "If you seek either God or Guru, they are not really two but one and identical. Rest assured that they are seeking you with a solicitude greater than you can ever imagine." God or the Guru is always in search of the earnest seeker. With a coin a dud piece, the woman would not have made that long search. Do you see what it means? The seeker must qualify himself through devotion, etc. The mind can never imagine or understand what work the Guru is doing within. If it tried, it would be like someone trying to remember where he was and what he was doing during his grandfather's wedding. Bhagavan was extremely subtle when he answered questions, but here we try to make it as plain and simple as possible. Since his answers were so subtle, we should be careful not to rush to hasty conclusions about what he meant. The answers he gave were not always recorded accurately, and even when they were, we can easily misunderstand the significance of what he said or the reason why he answered as he did. By clarifying that self is not the seer, perceiver, or knower of anything, Bhagavan has given a correction slip to many of the Shastras, ancient texts of Vedanta. If we had just read Shastras, it would not have been sufficiently clear to us that self is not the seer, because in this regard many contradictory ideas are expressed in Shastras. For instance, the word Atman, self, is often used to mean Jivatman, the individual or personal self, and Paramatman, remotest, ultimate, or supreme self, is used to mean our real self. In Sanskrit dictionaries, you will find that Atman means self, oneself, or I, but it is used to mean the thought I as well as the real I. The vague and ambiguous meaning of this word Atman and the various senses in which it is used has created many controversies and became the main point of disagreement between Buddhists and Vedantins. Bhagavan has avoided all this confusion and the resulting controversies by clarifying that in the sense in which he uses this term, Atman, is the sole reality, the awareness of being, Sat-Chit, that shines as I am, in all the three states of waking, dream, and sleep, and that the ego, mind, or jiva, soul or individual self, is the thought, I am the body, which rises and shines only in the waking and dream states. Moreover, he explained that what is seen cannot differ in nature from the eye that sees it, and that self therefore knows only Satchitananda and can never know names and forms. As he says in verse 4 of Uladu Narpadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how to do so? Can the sight be otherwise in nature than the eye that sees it? The real I is self, the infinite I. Since self is formless, it cannot see any forms, and hence it can never be a knower of otherness. Otherness consists of forms, so it can only be known by a form, and hence the knower or seer of otherness can only be the ego, the thought, I am the body. In this and in so many other ways, Bhagavan has given us a spotlight that we can shine on other teachings to see what truth may be in them. When we read any teaching of Bhagavan, such as a verse of Guru Vachaka Kovai, we should then and there reflect over it and try to put it into practice by abiding as self. That is, our Shravana, reading, Manana, reflection, and Nidhyayasana, self-contemplation, should go hand in hand, because then only are we truly reading what he taught. This is the correct way to learn his teachings. There is an old saying, think until you can think no more. It does not mean think of worldly things, but only think of the Guru, his greatness, and his teachings, until the mind can form no more thought. When we first come to our Guru, our love for him is so great that it occupies our whole mind, so we lose all interest in whatever else we previously desired. This is what Bhagavan referred to in verse 318 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, when he said, the feet of Guru Nata, who has taken us as his own by distinguishing the threefold fire of desire for women, wealth, and fame. However, this peace and freedom from desires is only temporary, because the Guru knows that in order for us to hold this peace permanently, we must master it ourselves. So after giving us a foretaste of the happiness of desirelessness, he puts us into the battlefield to face all that is within us. As Bhagavan said in the 3rd chapter of Maharshi's Gospel in reply to a devotee who said that after he left his presence, the peace he experienced there continued for a while as an undercurrent, but then faded away. If you strengthen the mind, that peace will continue for all time. Its duration is proportional to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice of self-attention, and such a mind is able to hold on to the current of peace. What is important is not our ability to abide as self, but our love to do so. Such love is true bhakti. Unless we have it, God and Guru can do nothing for us. They will not absorb us into self until we wholeheartedly love to subside and be absorbed forever. It is said that Guru is greater than God, because whereas God will fulfill all our desires, Guru will not, because his duty is to make us desire only liberation, moksha. Once we have been caught in the jaws of the tiger, that is, once the Guru has taken us as his own, he will kindle within us the fire of love for self-abidance. He will make us experience all the outward-going tendencies, visaya vasanas, that are within us, and will give us the love to overcome them by clinging firmly to self-attention, as he taught us to do in Nanyar, Who Am I? Even though visaya vasanas, inclinations or desires to experience things other than oneself, which come from time immemorial, rise as thoughts in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed by swarupa dhyana, self-attentiveness, increases and increases. Will be destroyed when svarupa dhyana, self-attentiveness, increases and increases. Without giving room even to the doubting thought, is it possible to dissolve so many vasanas and remain only as self? It is necessary to cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness. This battle between our love to be self-attentive and our outward-going tendencies is the combat of warfare of grace that he sang about in verse 74 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamana Malai. Arunachala, show me the warfare of grace in the public space devoid of going and coming. He will not let us hide from this battle, but he is always by our side, and by his grace we will surely win. Nothing is impossible for him, as he assured us in verse 215 of Guru Vataka Kovai. There is no undertaking that is not possible by the power of self. What is called the power of self is the power of grace. There are times when he will, for our own benefit, allow our vasanas to get the better of us, and we will then feel abandoned and pray to him, Arunachala, for whose sake did you take me as your own? If you now forsake me, the world will blame you. Panchakam are not just ordinary prayers or hymns for singing. They describe the actual experiences that every aspirant must go through. The more we progress in our sadhana, the more meaning we will find in them. But they would say the same about self-surrender or Guru Puja, worship of the Guru, if they knew the real meaning of these terms. But do we come here for something easy? The efforts people make to achieve worldly aims are nothing in comparison to the efforts that an aspirant must make to experience self-knowledge. As aspirants, our whole life is a fight, the Mahabharata war, because we must always be on the alert, vigilantly guarding against the rising of the ego. However, we need not worry about whether we will overcome our foes, our visaya vasanas, because as Krishna replied when Arjuna asked him how he could hope to defeat his own archery gurus, they are already killed by me. Fight your fight, and if you die in the process, what is the loss? This is the real spiritual life, fighting to conquer our visaya vasanas, by vigilantly watching their root, the ego, and thereby preventing it from rising. In comparison to this, posting as a great guru, getting up on platforms, giving beautiful lectures, blessings, vibhuti, and so on, is all mere child's play. We are not expected to serve Bhagavan outwardly or to propagate his teachings, but only to keep the fire of our own bhakti burning in our heart by constantly trying to attend only to ourself. the first person. We should not try to discourage others who are intent upon chasing after false gurus. Let them go and find out for themselves. Even if we were to try and discourage them, they would only think that we are prejudiced or fanatical. If they claim that some other guru is another Ramana or as great as him, we should not be perturbed, because that would only show that they have not understood who Ramana actually is, that he is not a separate person, but only the sole reality that shines as I am within each one of us. As Sri Krishna said, a wise person should not create confusion in the minds of ignorant people who are attached to karma. This is why Bhagavan often seemed to give his approval to practices other than atma-vichara, self-investigation or self-inquiry, and why whenever he was asked about such practices by people who were attached to them, he would always encourage each person to follow whichever practice they had faith in. It is also the reason why I ended the bhakti chapter in the second part of the path of Sri Ramana, saying that unless a person is tired of whatever other sadhanas they have been practicing, and ask us of their own accord whether there is any better way, we should not interfere and disturb their faith in such practices, but should encourage each of them to pursue their own path. Bhagavan is performing a delicate operation which will radically change our long-accustomed outlook of mistaking a body to be I and the world to be real into the outlook that we alone are. If this change were to occur too fast, it would put too much pressure on our mind, upsetting our mental balance, and could either make us insane or even drive us to commit suicide. But Bhagavan is a very skilled surgeon, and so he knows the right speed at which to change our outlook. If we are going too fast, he sometimes has to disconnect the current for a while, which he does by making us feel disinterested in practicing self-attention. Therefore, we should not be disheartened by such experiences because they happen for our own good, and he can sometimes use such periods of apparent disinterest to push us right up to the boundary. Even Muruganar had a similar experience, feeling that he was a helpless case. We should always have faith in Bhagavan's assurance that we are like the prey in the jaws of a tiger, and that we can therefore never escape. If we strain too much, we might be obstructing Bhagavan in his work, so he sometimes even has to put an end to this life and make us take a new body. Death, suicide, and insanity seem to be big things to us, but to him they are minor events which he uses for our own benefit. The culture in India provides Hindus with many outlets when the pressure becomes too great. Even before I knew Bhagavan, I used to take days off work just to go to a lonely place to weep for God. To have satsanga with the right friends can also be a great help during rough periods. Shravana and manana, studying and reflecting on Bhagavan's teachings, are also very important at such times. They are like a protective fortress. When I say that intermittent attempts at self-attention are important, remember that the rests in between are as important as the attempts. Even if you attend to self for only a few seconds at each attempt, these attempts will have their effect unknown to you. Because of these attempts, occasionally at other times, say in the middle of some work, you will feel that you are being automatically reminded of your mere being, I am. But it is not the mind that is reminding you. It is similar to pricking a banana with the pin. You do not know how close the pin has come to the other side until you prick your hand. Doing Japa of I is helpful for those beginners who are not able to recognize that our awareness of I, that is our awareness that I am, is something that is distinct from our awareness of our body or any other mental image. By practicing Japa or I, they can begin to experience for one moment, now and then, the awareness of I alone. Once they recognize this awareness of their mere existence, they can give up their Japa of I and instead practice simple self-attention. Summa iru, which means just be or be still, is the correct way of describing self-attention, because self-attention is simply not attending to anything other than I. So it does not involve our attention moving anywhere away from its source, which is I. The Tamil adverb summa implies not doing anything, because any doing or action always involves attending to something other than I. When we attend only to I, our attention remains in its source, as its source, I am. So self-attention is not an action but a state of just being. In one of his verses, Aruna Girinatha sings in that when Lord Muruga told him Summa iru, he ceased knowing anything, which means that he ceased attending to any second or third person. When you correctly attend to self, then no doubts about it will arise, for your self-attention will then be as clear to you as your present knowledge I am. On the other hand, we can also say that you will never know when you are correctly attend to self, because from that moment, all knowing will cease, and being alone will remain. Bhagavan once said, not only is self, Atman, that which does not know other things, it is that which does not know even itself as I am this. This idea was recorded by Sri Muruganar in verse 831 of Mettava Vilakam. Self does not know not only its own nature, but also anything else. Such a knowledge alone is the real I. That is, self-knowledge is a knowledge quite unlike any other knowledge, because not only does self not know itself as an object of knowledge, but also its knowing itself is not an action or doing, but only being. Knowing anything else is an action, whereas self knows itself just by being itself. Therefore, in verse 26 of Upadesa Undiyar, Bhagavan says, being self alone is knowing self, because self is that which is devoid of two, a knowing subject and a known object. This is the Maya Nishta, abidance as that, the absolute reality called Brahman. At times, Krishnamurti seems to be describing the state of a jnani. But what use is that to us unless we are told how to attain that state? He says we should observe suffering, conflict, and so on in the actuality of the present moment. But that is not possible because suffering and conflict, which are second and third persons, things other than I, the first person, are constantly changing in the flow of time from past to future. So in the actual present moment, there is no room for them. The actual present moment is infinitesimally brief, because it is the fine boundary between past and future, so there is absolutely no room in it for any movement or change, or even for the slightest rising the first person. Therefore, in the actual present moment, only the pure I am can be observed. In effect, he tells us to closely observe second and third persons, whereas Bhagavan tells us to have an attitude of indifference, udasina bhava, towards all second and third persons, to ignore them completely, and to attend only to the first person. The first sentence of the first Mangalam verse of Uladu Narpadu can be interpreted in several slightly different ways, but they all mean essentially the same thing. It can mean, if there were not something that really exists, which is called I, could there be any awareness of being, which is called M? Or can it mean, can awareness of being be other than what is I? The words Ula Unarvu can mean either awareness of being or awareness to meditate. So this sentence can also mean, other than what is I, can there be any awareness to meditate on it? Bhagavan wrote this verse to refute the popular myth in India that it is possible to meditate upon the reality. Initially, he wrote only the last 2 lines, which mean how to or who can meditate upon the thing that really exists. Know that being in the heart as it is alone is meditating upon it. However, when Kavyakanta saw that this verse had just 2 lines, and all the other verses had 4 lines, he suggested to Bhagavan that he should add 2 more lines to it. So Bhagavan then composed the first 2 lines. The resulting verse means, if there were not what is, could there be any awareness of being? Since the thing that is in the heart, devoid of thought, how to or who can meditate upon the thing that is, which is called heart? Know that being in the heart as it is, that is without any thought, alone is meditating upon it. The whole of Uladu Narpadu is an expansion of this one basic idea. So Bhagavan starts his teachings by disparaging the idea of meditation. But nowadays people call the hall where he lived the meditation hall, and they expect that everyone who comes to Ramana Ashram should meditate. Self-attention is not meditation in the usual sense of the word, because it is not a mental activity. It may seem that trying to attend to self is an action, but in fact it is simply the effort to make the mind subside. When we attend to anything other than self, the mind rises and is active. But when we try to attend only to self, it subsides and ceases to be active. We always know I am, so we are always aware of and therefore attending to self. But our self-awareness is usually mixed with awareness of other things. So Bhagavan tells us to try to attend only to self, because such an attempt is the only means to make the mind subside. In fact, the mind that tries to attend only to self can never do so, because it is the nature of the mind to attend to second and third persons, which are non-self. But by trying to attend only to self, it will merge in its source, our real self, and then self alone will remain to know itself, as it always does. In verse 1 of Uladu Narpadu, the term Serpadam, which means the connecting, underlying, or pervading screen, can be taken to mean time and space, which underlie, support, and pervade the appearance of the world. The entire verse means, because we see the world, accepting one original thing that has a power that becomes many is certainly the one best option. The picture of names and forms, the world, the one who sees it, the supporting screen on which it appears, and the pervading light of consciousness that illumines it. All these are he, the one original thing, which is self. The verb urupadu usually means to form or reform, because the basic meaning of uru is form, but uru can also mean svararupa, our own form, or real self. So in verse 33 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamana Malay, the term urupadu vidai means atma vidya, the science and art of abiding as self. On the other hand, sepadi vidai means a deceptive art or science, so it can mean any worldly skill. Katru can mean either learning or one who is proficient, and ipadi can mean either this world or in this way. Thus this verse has 2 alternate meanings. Arunachala, teach me the art of abiding as self, giving up this worldly delusion of learning deceptive skills. Arunachala, giving up deluding me in this way as one who is proficient in the art of deception. Teach me instead the art of self-abidance.